The seat in the far corner of the classroom had been empty for 2 years before Nora Vasile took it. Nobody remembered who sat there before her. Nobody paid much attention when she arrived either. She walked in on the first day of the semester with a small gray bag over one shoulder, found the corner seat without asking anyone where to sit, and opened her notebook before Professor Calix had even reached the front of the room. That was 3 months ago. Since then, she had not raised her hand once. Verdant Hub University sat inside a space station the size of a small moon, orbiting a pale yellow star at the edge of the interspecies academic corridor. It had been built as a neutral place, a school where young minds from dozens of civilizations could study together without the weight of politics or old wars pressing down on them. The halls smelled like recycled air and 3 different kinds of alien food at any given hour. The gravity shifted slightly depending on which wing you were in. The windows were thick and scratched from decades of micro debris, but on clear rotation cycles, you could see the star from the common area, and it looked almost warm. Nora did not spend much time at the windows. She arrived early to every class. She left quietly when it ended. Her assignments came in on time, always correct, never decorated with the extra commentary that Professor Calix privately enjoyed seeing from students who were engaged. Her work was clean and efficient, like something written by someone who had already decided not to waste words. Dren noticed her first. Dren was hard to miss, a large insectoid student from the Velhari system, with 4 upper limbs and compound eyes that caught light at odd angles. He was loud and genuinely curious about everyone, which made him unusual at Verdant Hub. He had tried to start a conversation with Nora during the second week, sliding into the seat beside her and saying he had not caught her name yet. She told him. That was it. Just the name. He tried again the following week, and the week after. Each time she answered what he asked, and nothing more. No hostility. Just a quiet that had edges to it, like a door that was closed but not locked. Dren kept knocking anyway. The rest of the class had mostly stopped thinking about her. Vorath, a broad, gray-scaled student from the Rukani system, where academic ranking was tied directly to social standing, had made his assessment of Nora inside the first 2 weeks and filed it away. Humans were soft-world creatures. They came from comfortable planets with manageable weather and modest fauna. They were well-meaning and occasionally clever, but rarely remarkable. Vorath had met a few before. They talked a lot, usually about their feelings, and they startled easily. Nora did not seem to talk much or feel much, which Vorath found mildly confusing, but he did not consider it worth investigating. What nobody at Verdant Hub knew, because she had not told them, and the intake forms only asked for homeworld name, not homeworld classification, was that Kareth 9 was not a soft world. Kareth 9 was a Class 7 death world. It sat at the outer edge of the habitable zone and compensated for its distance from its star by producing life that was dense, aggressive, and extraordinarily good at surviving. The fauna there had been evolving for 600 million years without a mass extinction event. The colony that Nora grew up in had a perimeter fence that was checked every morning, not for damage, but to see what had tested it overnight. Children on Kareth 9 learned to read terrain before they learned to read text. They learned to identify the sound of a predator's movement, the difference between a body pushing through undergrowth and wind doing the same thing. They learned which directions to avoid at dusk. They learned how to be still in a way that most creatures in the galaxy never had to practice, because most creatures in the galaxy had never needed to disappear inside a moment to survive it. Nora had been 12 the first time she spent a night outside the perimeter fence alone. Not by accident. It was a tradition on Kareth 9 for the families that had been there long enough to develop traditions. You went out. You came back. You did not talk about what you saw. She had come back. She did not talk about it. At Verdant Hub, she ran laps in the lower maintenance corridors every evening after dinner. The corridors were dim and narrow and smelled like machine oil and old wiring. Most students avoided them. Nora had found them by accident in her first week, following a route on the station map that turned out to be outdated, and she had felt something ease in her chest the moment she stepped into the low light and the close walls. It felt manageable. It felt like something she could learn. She ran the same route 3 times a week and a different route twice a week, and without meaning to, she had begun to map the station in her head. Not the official map, The real one, where the pressure doors were, which shafts connected to which, where the wide corridors bottlenecked and where they opened up. She did not know why she did this. She had always done this. On the evening before everything changed, Nora sat at her small desk and looked out the scratched window at the pale yellow star. She ate her dinner slowly. She did not feel anything unusual. She just watched the star, and the star gave nothing back. And she was fine with that. She had always been fine with things that did not explain themselves. The lecture was about predators. Professor Calix had arranged a series of holographic displays along the front wall of the classroom, each one showing a different apex creature from a different Class 3 world. A long-limbed ambush hunter from the Dithani forests, a pack organism from the shallow seas of Rune, something with no eyes and 12 limbs that lived inside cave systems on a moon nobody had given a proper name to yet. Professor Calix was a Sorvian, a plant-based species with pale green skin and long fingers that moved when he talked, curling and uncurling like something that had learned to gesture by watching others do it for a long time. He loved his subject. That was obvious. His voice got slower and quieter the more interested he was, which confused new students who expected excitement to be loud. He was very quiet today. The defining characteristic of an apex predator, he said, is not size or strength. It is the ability to remain at the top of its environment's food chain across a variety of conditions. Adaptability, the capacity to change method without changing goal. He advanced to the next display, a creature that looked almost mammalian, low to the ground, with dense muscle and small pale eyes. This one, he said, is from Kareth 9. Nora did not move. Kareth 9 is a Class 7 designation. The fauna there evolved under conditions that most life-bearing worlds simply do not produce. This particular organism has no common name in the Galactic Registry. The colonists who live on Kareth 9 call it a grayback. It masses approximately 400 kilograms. It has been documented taking prey 3 times its own size. Vorath, sitting 2 rows ahead of Nora, leaned toward the student beside him, a small amphibian called Pell, and said something in a low voice. Pell's skin rippled in the color pattern that meant amusement. Dren, who was sitting close enough to Nora to notice things, looked over at her. Her hand had closed around her stylus, not tightly, not dramatically, just closed, the way a hand does when something passes through a person that they have decided not to show. Then it opened again, and she kept writing her notes. Calix moved on to the next display. The moment passed. After class, Dren fell into step beside her in the corridor. He said Kareth 9, Dren said. He did, Nora said. Is that where you are from? Yes. Dren processed that for a few steps. His upper limbs moved slightly, which was what he did when he was choosing his words carefully. Vorath said something during the lecture, about humans. I do not think he realized I could hear him. What did he say? He said the interesting thing about a Deathworld lecture is that they never show the prey animals. Nora glanced at him sideways. What did Pell think was funny about that? I think Pell thought Vorath was implying that humans are the prey animals. Nora was quiet for a moment. They walked past a group of students clustered around a vending unit near the corridor junction. What do you think? She asked. Dren's compound eyes caught the overhead light. I think, he said carefully, that you have been at this station for 3 months, and I have never once seen you startled by anything. And I have been watching, because I find you interesting. And I think that is a strange quality for a prey animal. Nora almost smiled. It was a small thing, there and then gone. Half the class thinks you are mute, Dren added. I told them you spoke to me. I do not think they believed me. I am not mute, Nora said. I know, I have the evidence. They reached the corridor junction where their routes split. Nora stopped and adjusted the strap of her bag. I do not see the point, she said, in talking when I do not have anything to say yet. Dren tilted his head. Yet? She walked away without answering that. Dren stood at the junction and watched her go, and thought that was either the most mysterious thing anyone had ever said to him, or the most honest. He could not decide which. Nora took the long route back to her room. She went past the lower access corridor on sublevel 4. Not to run, just to check it the way she always checked things without thinking about it. The lights were the same low amber. The air was the same machine smell. One of the panels on the east wall had a new scratch on it, probably from a maintenance cart. She noted it and kept walking. She was halfway up the stairwell when the emergency alarm sounded. It hit every speaker on the station at once, a sharp, cycling tone, 3 pulses, then a long hold. Nora stopped walking. Her hand found the wall without her deciding to reach for it. Her breathing stayed even. Oren's voice followed the tone, calm and unhurried. Attention all station residents. This is a scheduled emergency response drill. All students please proceed to your designated assembly zones. This is a drill. Nora stood still for another 3 seconds after the announcement ended. Her heart had not moved much. But something behind her eyes had gone very clear, very fast, the way it always did, and it took a moment for that clarity to soften back into the ordinary texture of an afternoon. She took her hand off the wall. She went upstairs. She ate dinner at the same time she always did, and she slept without any trouble, and in the morning she went to class. 3 days later, the alarm sounded again. This time, Oren did not say it was a drill. The sound came first, not the alarm. Something before the alarm, a low, irregular vibration that moved through the floor and up through the chair legs and into the backs of everyone's legs, though only one person in the classroom registered it as significant. Nora's pen stopped moving. They were in the middle of a group discussion on biome classification. Dren was talking. Vorath was pretending to take notes. Pell was genuinely taking notes, small and focused in the front row. Calix had stepped out to get something from his office down the hall. The vibration came again. Deeper this time. Then the alarm. 3 pulses. Long hold. 3 pulses. Long hold. Oren's voice came in over the tone, and it was the same calm voice as the drill, but the words were different. Attention all station residents. Containment breach in Research Wing 7. All academic wing personnel. Shelter in place. Seal room access panels. Do not use maintenance corridors. Security response is active. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. For a moment nobody moved. Then everyone moved at once. Pell made a high sound and slid under the nearest desk. 3 students near the door scrambled to get the access panel sealed. Vorath stood up fast, his chair scraping back hard against the floor, his eyes moving to the room's entry points with the trained instinct of someone from a warrior culture, but a warrior culture built for open-field combat, not sealed station corridors, and his body had no target, nothing to orient against, and Nora could see the specific confusion of a fighter with no terrain to read. Dren was calm, loud, but calm. His upper limbs were spread in a settling gesture, and he was talking to the smaller students near him, telling them to get low, get back from the windows, stay together. Nora was already gone from her seat. Nobody saw her leave. That was not unusual for her. People did not tend to track her movements. She existed in rooms the way a piece of furniture did. Present, unremarkable, noticed mostly in absence. The corridor outside was empty. Oren's instructions were still looping from the ceiling speakers. Shelter in place. Seal your doors. Do not use maintenance corridors. Nora went to the maintenance corridor. The access hatch was on the east wall of the sub-level 2 junction, behind a standing utility panel. She had found it in her 4th week. It was not on the updated map. She pulled the panel aside, turned the manual latch, and stepped through. Inside, the amber lights were off. Emergency lighting only, a dim red that turned the narrow shaft into something that felt like the inside of a living thing. She moved quietly and without hesitation. From what she had heard in Oren's announcement, the breach was in Research Wing 7. That wing sat on the far side of the station from the academic block, separated by 3 pressure bulkheads and 2 long connector corridors. She did not know what had gotten out. Class 6 designation meant large, aggressive, likely not sapient. The station's maintenance shaft network ran along the inner wall of the connector corridors. She found the first sign of the creature at the junction of shafts 4 and 7. A grate on the east wall had been pushed inward, bent from the outside. The metal creased in a pattern that told her something wide and very strong had moved through it at speed. She crouched by the grate and looked at the edges. Wet. Some kind of fluid, not blood, more like the thick saline coating that deep-sea organisms sometimes carried on their outer membrane. She had read about the research wing's current specimens roster once, by accident, when a shared station terminal had been left open. She had not meant to read it. She had just seen it. And then she knew it. The way she always knew things she looked at once with full attention. Specimen roster. Bay 3. 1 Class 6 aquatic predator. Designation deep form, Rithani ocean origin. Approximate mass, 800 kilograms. Warning, highly sensitive to pressure change. Extremely fast in confined spaces. Confined spaces. She looked down the shaft ahead of her, long and dark and narrow. She took a slow breath. Then she kept moving. Behind her, back in the classroom, Vorath had finally stopped looking at the door and started helping Dren keep the smaller students calm. He was not good at the words, but he was solid and large, and that helped in its own way. Dren had done a head count twice. He was trying to remember where Nora had been sitting before the alarm. He thought she had been in her usual corner. He could not remember seeing her leave. He counted again. She was not in the room. He looked at the sealed door. He looked at the access panel beside it, and then at the maintenance hatch in the east wall. And then he understood, or thought he understood something. And the feeling that moved through him was not quite fear and not quite awe, and sat in the uncomfortable space between them. The alarm kept cycling. Somewhere deep in the maintenance shafts, something very large was moving through the dark, and Nora was moving toward it. She heard it before she saw it, a wet, rhythmic sound, not breathing exactly, more like the noise of something that moved using its whole body, contracting and expanding through the narrow space. The shaft ahead carried sound cleanly. She stopped and listened for 4 seconds, counting the intervals between the sounds, building a picture of the creature's pace. It was not moving fast right now. It was searching. She thought about what she knew. Deep form aquatic predator, Rithani origin. 800 kilograms. Extremely fast in confined spaces. Sensitive to pressure change. Sensitive to pressure change. She backed up slowly until she found the maintenance panel she had passed 2 minutes ago. It was a pressure door, a secondary bulkhead, manual override on the left side, designed to seal a section of shaft in case of hull integrity issues. She checked the mechanism in the dark using her fingers. The latch was stiff but workable. The seal looked intact. She kept moving forward. The red emergency lighting in this section was partially out. 1 fixture in 3 was working. She moved through bands of dim red and complete dark, and the dark did not slow her down. The sound ahead got louder. She came around a slow bend in the shaft and saw it. It filled the corridor from wall to wall. In the low red light, it looked like something assembled from the deep ocean floor. No distinct head, a long body with a surface that pulsed slowly, many small limbs along its underside that gripped the walls and floor and moved it forward in a flowing, boneless way. 2 large sensory organs on its front end tracked the air. One of the security team's containment grenades was lodged in its outer membrane, unexploded, which told her that security had found it and that the encounter had not gone well for security. She stood still, complete stillness, not the stillness of someone frozen with fear. The other kind, the kind learned over years, where the body becomes a thing the environment has decided is not worth noticing. The creature's sensory organs moved, swept the space ahead, passed over her, moved on. She exhaled, slow and controlled. Then she did something that would have looked insane to anyone watching who did not understand what she was doing. She moved forward, not away from it, toward it, carefully, precisely, staying just far enough behind it to be outside the direct sweep of its sensory organs, tracking its pace, matching its movement. She was leading it, not from the front, from behind, nudging its path with small sounds, a deliberate scrape of her boot on the left wall when she needed it to veer right, silence when she needed it to keep going straight. She had done this with Kareth 9 wildlife since she was 8 years old. The technique had a name back home. Her father had called it threading. You found the thing, you found where it wanted to go, and you made it go somewhere more useful instead. You never fought it. You never ran from it. You just adjusted its path, one small choice at a time, until the choice you needed it to make was the only one that felt natural. She threaded the creature through 2 corridor junctions, each time keeping herself in its blind spot, each time using the smallest possible signal to redirect it. The sealed chamber was at the end of Shaft 9. It was a storage unit for large maintenance equipment, wide enough, deep enough, and rated for pressure isolation. She had noted it weeks ago with the vague and patternless logic of someone who cataloged useful spaces without asking why. She moved ahead of the creature now, carefully, using a parallel access hatch to get in front of it without crossing its sensory range. Her pulse was elevated. Her breathing was deliberate. She got to the chamber door, held it open, and positioned herself on the far side of the frame. The creature came around the last bend. It sensed the open space, the change in air pressure, the slight drop in temperature that the large empty chamber produced. Open space meant safety to a creature built for open ocean. It moved toward the door the way water moves toward a drain. It went in. She pulled the door shut behind it and turned the pressure lock in one motion. The seal engaged with a solid, definitive sound. She stood in the corridor and listened. The creature moved inside the chamber, bumping against the walls, then slowed. The pressure equalization inside the sealed space would keep it calm. It would not panic. It would not damage itself trying to get out. She straightened up. She looked at her hands. They were steady. She sat down on the floor of the corridor with her back against the wall and opened the small emergency ration she kept in the side pocket of her bag, because of course she kept one there. She ate it slowly in the dark, listening to the alarm still cycling somewhere above her, and waited. 11 minutes later, the security team found her. 4 of them, in full containment gear, weapons raised, following the creature's trail through the shaft system. They came around the corner and stopped. Nora looked up at them. She had almost finished the ration bar. "It is in there," she said, and pointed at the sealed chamber door. The team leader stared at her for a long moment. "You are a student," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at the chamber door. He looked back at her. "Are you injured?" "No." He stood there for another moment, and then he called it in. By the next morning, everyone knew. Verdant Hub was a large station, but it carried information the way small towns did, fast, and with extra details added at every step. By the time the story reached the upper residential wing, Nora had apparently taken down the creature with her bare hands. By the time it circled back through the academic common area, she had done it in complete darkness using a technique no security team on the station was trained in. The bare hands part was not accurate. The rest of it was mostly true. Nora ate breakfast alone, as she always did, and noticed that the table radius around her was larger than usual. Students were not avoiding her exactly. They were just leaving room, the way people unconsciously leave room for something they have reclassified. Dren arrived and sat down directly across from her with a plate of something warm and yellow and said nothing for a while. "You could have told me," he said, finally. "Told you what?" "What Kareth 9 actually is." Nora looked at him steadily. "You knew it was a death world. You looked it up. You told me that in week 4. I looked up the classification number. I did not really understand what Class 7 means until last night when I could not sleep and read everything I could find about it." He paused. "The fauna there. The things the colonists have to do just to go outside." "It is not that bad," Nora said. Dren gave her a look. "It is manageable," she said, "if you learn how." Dren was quiet for a moment. "When you were a child, did you go outside the perimeter fence? Alone?" Nora picked up her cup. "Yes." "How old?" 12. He stared at her. "Most kids on Kareth 9 do," she said. "It is just something you do. You learn the terrain. You learn what is out there, and then you know it, and knowing it is better than not knowing it, because not knowing something dangerous is the actual threat. The animal is not the threat. Not knowing the animal is the threat. Dren sat with that for a while. "Is that why you mapped the station?" he asked. Nora looked at him. "I did not map it." "I think you did," he said quietly. "I think you walked every corridor and noted every hatch and every pressure door without deciding to. Because that is just what people from Kareth 9 do. And last night that saved 2 security officers who are alive right now, because you got to the creature before it got to them." Nora said nothing. Vorath found them after the morning lecture. He came across the common area with the deliberate stride of someone who had made a decision and was not going to change it now that he was halfway there. He stopped at the edge of their table. Dren watched him with neutral, compound eyes. Vorath looked at Nora. "On Rukon," he said, "we have a word. It does not translate cleanly. It means something like, 'the fighter you did not see.'" He paused. "I used a different word for you. Before. I was incorrect." Nora said nothing. "Nora." Vorath nodded once, turned, and walked away. Dren watched him go. "I think that is the most he has apologized to anyone in his life." "He did not apologize," Nora said. "No, it was better than an apology," he corrected himself. Professor Calix called her to his office that afternoon. It was a small room full of growing things. Actual plants in real soil, which took up most of his available space and all of his available care. He sat behind them, more than behind his desk. He looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "Your homeworld," he said. "Why did you not mention it in your introduction at the start of term?" "You asked us to give our names and our field of interest," Nora said. "I gave both. You did not think it was relevant. I did not know what would be relevant yet. I had not seen the classroom." Calix leaned back. "What would have changed if you had mentioned it?" Nora thought about this honestly. People would have looked at me differently, before they knew me. I did not want to be the thing they were looking at. I wanted to look at things. Calix was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and genuine, and it moved through the plants around him like a small wind. "That," he said, pointing at her, "is the most ecologically sound philosophy I have heard from a student in 11 years. Nora looked at the plants. "You have a lot of living things in a small room." "I know," he said. "It makes me feel more like a person and less like a professor." She nodded. She understood that. She left his office a few minutes later and walked back through the corridor, and the station felt slightly different than it had the day before, though she could not have said exactly what had changed. She had not changed. She was still the same person who had walked in 3 months ago with a gray bag and found the corner seat without asking. But something around her had shifted, and she was aware of it the way she was aware of most things. Quietly, from a slight distance, without making a sound. 2 weeks after the incident, Verdant Hub received its new semester intake. 43 students from 21 systems, arriving in 3 separate shuttle groups over the course of a single rotation. The docking bay filled with noise and movement, new voices, new colors, the particular controlled chaos of young people arriving somewhere unfamiliar and trying to look like they had done this before. Nora was eating lunch in the far corner of the cafeteria when the first group came through. She watched them the way she watched everything, quietly, without appearing to watch at all. A few of the new arrivals glanced around the cafeteria with that universal first-day expression, cataloging the room, finding the social structures, deciding where it was safe to be. One of them, a tall student with wide pale eyes and a build that suggested low-gravity origin, spotted Nora and said something to the person beside them. The person beside them was another new student, shorter, with the kind of nervous energy that expressed itself in constant small movements. Nora was too far away to hear them, but she had been reading lips and body language since she was old enough to understand that sound was not always reliable. The tall one said, "She looks like one of the exchange students, probably here on an academic grant." "She seems quiet." The shorter one looked over at Nora for a moment, then away. Dren arrived at Nora's table and set down his tray. He had seen the exchange too. compound eyes had broad range, and he glanced toward the new students, then at Nora. "They noticed you," he said. "Everyone notices everyone on the first day," Nora said. The tall one made an assessment. "I know. You read it." "Yes." Dren picked up his utensil and looked at his food. "Are you going to correct the assessment?" "No," Nora said. "Not today." Dren made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but lived in the same place. He had stopped being surprised by her answers. He had started to find them, in some way he could not fully explain, reassuring, like a fixed point you could orient yourself by, even if you did not always understand what it meant. They ate together without talking for a while. The station had been different since the breach, not dramatically. Verdant Hub was too large and too old to be dramatically changed by a single event. But in the ways that mattered, in the small daily patterns of how people moved and where they looked, things had shifted. When Nora walked into a classroom, there was a moment, not a long one, just a beat where the room adjusted, like a slight change in air pressure. Students did not stare at her. They did not crowd her or ask her questions or treat her the way people sometimes treated those who had done something notable. She would not have tolerated that, and somehow the station seemed to understand this without being told. What happened instead was subtler. People made room. Not out of fear, out of a kind of awareness. Vorath had started acknowledging her in the corridors. A single nod, direct and without decoration. On Rukan, she had since learned, that particular nod had a specific meaning. It was the greeting you gave to someone you had placed in the same category as yourself. He gave it to very few people. He gave it to her now every time their paths crossed. She returned it. Oren had quietly added her contact identifier to the emergency response list 3 days after the incident. No announcement, no explanation. She had noticed it when she checked her station messages and found a system access update waiting. She had read it once and closed it and not mentioned it to anyone. She had started running a new route in the maintenance corridors. It took her through Shaft 9, past the sealed chamber. Empty now, the creature safely returned to Research Wing 7 under improved containment. She stopped there sometimes, not for long, just long enough to stand in the spot and let it be what it was, a place where she had made a decision that turned out to be the right one. She did not think of it as heroism. She thought of it the way she thought of threading back home, a skill applied to a situation. The situation had resolved. That was the point. But she stood there sometimes anyway. In Calix's class, she had started speaking. Not often and not at length, but when she had something to say, she said it now, and the room listened in the way a room listens when the person speaking has demonstrated that they do not waste words. Calix never acknowledged it directly. He simply called on her when her hand was up, and noted, privately, that she had been right every time. On the afternoon of the new intake's 3rd day, Nora passed the tall, pale-eyed student in the main corridor. The student was looking at a station map, slightly lost, head moving between the screen and the hallway signs. Nora stopped. "Sub-level 3 access is 2 junctions east," she said. "The map is outdated. There is a new connector behind the utility panel on the left." The student looked at her, surprised. "Oh, thank you." Nora nodded and kept walking. Behind her, she heard the student say something to their companion in a quieter voice. She did not turn around to read it. She did not need to. She already knew the station had just reclassified itself, one small conversation at a time. That was how it had always worked, back home and out here alike. You did not announce yourself. You just let the world learn.